Cush Sovereignty, Black Righteousness by L. James Bolin. Chapter 3 Part 1, Betrayal and Obedience. Samuel was quiet for a moment, and it appeared as if he had started talking to himself. They were more separated than united. Pointing at Cush, he continued. Let me say this United States we live in was divided in every aspect of the word. They were divided by the color of their skin, race, financial status, and political parties. Back in the days, they had some fool running for president whose slogan was "Make America Great Again." Our people were asking, when was it great for us? The United States should have been called the Divided States of America because even the division was divided, and that division caused its downfall. Cush looked at Samuel. Huh? Samuel laughed, just thinking out loud, son. How fat people were at war with the skinny, dark-skinned versus light-skinned, rich versus the poor. But never mind that for now. Samuel leaned back in his chair and pointed at Cush. Lean back and rest, son, I've got a lot to tell ya. As he continued, it wasn't until King Joseph of Old Ireland became king that the word Wakatilians was first mentioned in modern history. Now, don't misunderstand, we got away from having authority figures like kings, queens, presidents, and all that during the Latrunculian War, or some would call it World War III, waving his hands in the air carelessly, Samuel continued. But King Joseph was the great-great-grandson of someone who was of the so-called royal family back in the days, and he did something extra special to, or for, the Abenians to reclaim that title. Anyways, Mr. King Joseph was just a simple computans with. Samuel held his fingers up to motion quotes, he had that special DNA. And he hated any type of authority other than his own. They also knew him as a cold-hearted, self-centered, arrogant, narcissistic, egotistical, and drunken whoremonger and any other negative term you can find, until he met Chi from the clan of Kamaria. It was often said that he wasn't the brightest light in the room, if you know what I mean. Cush said. No, I don't. Samuel shook his head. It means he wasn't too bright, but she was a strong Wakatilian woman who demanded respect and never settled for anything less. She was the total opposite of her oldest sister Yella, a concubine slave by choice, who was already in King Joseph's palace. She was the Queen of Ireland for 3 years. Using his hands again, waving them side to side as he continued. Give or take a couple of months, when she was murdered as the first wife of King Joseph and given the title, Samuel became animated, greatest maiden peer of Old Ireland. Cush laughed at Samuel as he talked in a European dialect, and Samuel smiled back at him. You see, in ancient England, they had a system whereby your inheritance gave you a special position. This inheritance classified you as being royalty. King Joseph adopted this same system. Samuel, scratching his head, or was it his father? Anywho, King Joseph is the one who married our ancestor. They brought back this system, but it died soon after King Joseph's death. Their marriage and her execution made her a historical figure in the first political and religious upheaval that led to the Computan separation from Abenian authority and rule. She was the daughter of Shaka, and his wife, Lizzie, was from southern Ireland, proud descendants of the Twa tribe. She wasn't her real name was Anaya, but everyone called her Chi. The story goes that King Joseph often made trips to southern Ireland to replenish his cabinets with fresh fruits, herbs, homemade beers, and fine liquors. There he met Chi and fell madly in love with her, not caring that she was Wakatilian because, like always, it was against the law to marry one. Still, you could have won as a slave, so he began pursuing Chi, but she resisted his attempts to seduce her. She refuses to be anyone's concubine. Her sister, already the king's concubine, was enough embarrassment to disgrace the family. Her dreams were to become an influential leader of her people. She rejected all his advancements and respectfully confronted the king. It soon became the one object of King Joseph's desire to change his whoremonger's ways to marry Chi. Samuel paused. Let me stop right there. You can't make a hoe into a housewife, in this case, a husband, for she knew who he was but ignored the signs. He had already been with her sister, but anyway, she thought he would change. Hell, I don't know, we would have to ask her, plus Sabaoth had his hand in the decision, or else me and you wouldn't be here. However, when it became clear to Abeni A23, an elite Abenian, who governs this section of the world, that King Joseph was trying to marry a Wakatilian, all hell broke loose. He demanded it to end in an annulment, or else they would separate themselves from the Computans of Old Ireland, leaving them to fend for themselves. This threat didn't sit too well with the king, and out of drunken anger and contempt toward the Abenians, King Joseph married She, made her queen, and granted her the title of the greatest of the great maiden of Old Ireland. Shortly afterward, Abenian 23 decreed sentences for excommunication against King Joseph and his entire territory. Because of this marriage and these excommunications, they officially broke off their ties with the Irish Computans. King Joseph crowned She, Queen of Old Ireland, and she gave birth to Queen Anaya almost a year later. Back then, men always wanted their firstborn to be boys, and her gender disappointed him. It did not entirely discourage him, for he said a son would surely follow and profess to love his daughter, Anaya. Once the royal baby was born, Queen Abelin, King Joseph's mother, along with governors and generals of each Commonwealth nation, was informed, along with the rest of the royal family and She's family. There was chaos in the streets by this time because the people started feeling the effects of not having the Abenians' technology or its advantages. Samuel stopped for a moment. "Billy, can you explain this silly birth ceremony?" Billy then said, "Sure. A royal physician signs an official document confirming the newborn's gender, weight, and birth time. A palace official will bring this document out of the hospital, and this is the first sign the world will get that the royal baby has arrived, and it's then handed it to a messenger, who will take it to the palace under guard. They put the notice into a frame at the palace, positioned on an easel, and placed in the palace forecourt. At which time the world will know the gender of the baby. However, it could take anywhere from up to 8 days before the new arrival's name is announced. After the announcement, a brief statement by the king of the child's birth outside the hospital." Samuel interrupted. "Thanks, I got it from here, thank you, Billy." Billy said, "You're welcome." Samuel continues. At the hospital, the king made his announcement of the child. Although they were at the ceremony, She's parents were supposed to be up there with the royal family, but because they were Wakatilians, they were standing in the back of the crowd. They minted 5,000 silver pennies to mark the royal birth. Samuel pulled a silver penny out of his pocket, handed it to Cush, like this one. The king's artillery sounded celebratory gun salutes in the royal park with 41-round salute, and again by the honorable artillery at the Tower of Ireland with a 62-round salute. In keeping with tradition, as she left the royal hospital, they burned her sheets, too, because she was Wakatilian, and she appeared on the steps of the building with her newborn as the crowd looked on. The ceremony lasted for 2 days before She's family was to head back home. She's father, Shaka, approached her with tears in his eyes. "I will return in 8 months to take the baby and perform my family ceremonies in the Holy of Holies. Don't let anyone know, not even your Uncle Moll. Do not let them know where the baby or I am, because it is of great importance to Sabaoth that no one knows her whereabouts. You will find out why I have asked of you such requests later." All royal documents of her birth and 500 silver pennies. She smiled and said, "It is so." After 8 months, Shaka showed up at the palace, and with open arms, she had everything he asked for. He didn't stay there long enough to see the king, and she never saw her daughter again. 3 miscarriages followed, and King Joseph returned to his old ways of having orgies and entertaining other women. The king's love for She was gone, and so was his loyalty to her. I hear tell it, not once did he ask about the first baby, shaking his head, and he repeated himself, not once. The full effects of the Abenians' absence caused civil unrest and violence to take over the land. She was taken and charged with high treason and sent to the highest court in Ireland by her accusers. She was tried before a jury of peers, including her former betrothed and her uncle, Moll. She was found guilty. Like I told you before, everyone who is your family ain't your family. She was beheaded days later. The charges against her were adultery, inciting a coup, witchcraft, and a bunch of other stuff according to Old Ireland laws. After a formal apology, in front of the citizens with all the balloons and whistles, Old Ireland was punished for their sins, but eventually united with the Abenians once again. Cush had forgotten he held the silver penny in his hand as he handed it to Samuel. "These Abenians sure do hate us, but why?" Samuel said. "Yes, they do. You will find out, just wait. Remember, like always, history repeats itself." Martha interrupted them when she entered the living room with some fresh squeezed lemonade. "Here, old man, y'all gon' need something to drink with all that talking y'all doing." Samuel smiled. "Thanks, old lady, I sure do." Taking a drink, Samuel smacked his lips as Martha handed Cush a glass. Samuel continued, "This rang true for the Wakatilians of Ireland." He paused. "Martha, this here lemonade is something else." Martha smiled. "Thanks, babe." Samuel continued as he licked his lips again, "This rang true for the Wakatilians of Ireland, and the life in Ireland was cruel toward the Wakatilians. For the next 200 years after Chi's death, the Abenians took revenge on the Wakatilians because of what she had done. The silver pennies were thrown out, but the Wakatilians found them and kept them for themselves. It was so bad that they started immigrating to the Americas as a way to get out, but even that wasn't a joyful event. Because they were Wakatilians, they could not travel the way the Computans did, and on top of that, the Computans started spreading rumors that they carried contagious diseases. They hired desperate Anakitas to ship them on old rusty naval ships as indentured servants to the Americas for the price of 1 year of servitude. As it showed lucratively, the cost increased every year as these immigrants rushed to get out of the country. The first servants imported into the Americas were just a few hundred Wakatilians, promising to send for their relatives afterward. They refer to these laborers as servants, not as slaves, because many agreed to work for land and rights. Little did they know it was just empty promises and straight-up lies.